During dinner with my future in-laws, my phone vibrated against my leg under the antique mahogany table. A text from an unknown number lit up the screen. Do not eat the mushroom bisque. They put something in it. Signed T. I kept my smile perfectly frozen, taking a slow, steady breath as I glanced around the candlelit dining room. Vivian, my future mother-in-law, was raising her crystal glass for a toast to my upcoming wedding. Julian, my handsome fiance, was watching me with an intensity that suddenly felt predatory. Then my screen lit up again with an automated alert. 75 missed calls from the Chase Bank Fraud Department. My name is Nia. I am 32 years old, and I work as a forensic accountant. I grew up in the foster care system right here in Atlanta, Georgia. Being a Black woman who built a $4 million net worth entirely from scratch taught me a long time ago to trust hard facts, bank statements, and cold numbers over pretty words and designer suits. Before I continue this story and tell you how I brought down an entire fake empire, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever smiled politely through a dinner with people you knew were trying to destroy you. Let me give you the reality check of what I walked into that night. We were sitting inside the Caldwell family's sprawling multi-million-dollar estate in Buckhead. To the outside world, the Caldwells were the absolute pinnacle of the Black elite in Atlanta. Desmond Caldwell, my future father-in-law, ran a prestigious community charity that supposedly funded local schools. Vivian hosted extravagant galas and wore pearls that cost more than my first car. Their daughter Jada flaunted European designer bags while looking down her nose at my orphaned background. Her husband Trayvon, a quiet man who was constantly belittled by the family for not coming from old money, mostly stayed in the background. And then there was Julian. Julian was supposedly a brilliant hedge fund manager. He was charming, wore perfectly tailored suits, and knew exactly how to make me feel like I had finally found the family I never had. I sat there in my seat, the glow of the chandelier reflecting off the fine china. Classical music played softly from hidden speakers, masking the heavy tension in the room. The catering staff moved silently around the table, placing steaming bowls of creamy mushroom bisque in front of each of us. The rich scent of truffle and heavy cream filled the air. I looked down at my phone one more time. The sender signed off as T. Trayvon. I slowly lifted my gaze across the table. Trayvon was staring rigidly at his own plate, a bead of sweat forming at his temple. His hands were gripping his napkin with white knuckles. He absolutely refused to meet my eyes. My forensic accountant brain immediately went into overdrive, connecting the data points at lightning speed. 75 calls from the fraud department. Julian's sudden insistence on merging our financial portfolios last week. The desperate urgency in Vivian's voice when she insisted I finish my soup before the main course was served. The panic threatened to rise in my throat, but I locked it down completely. I needed a distraction, and I needed to empty my bowl without consuming a single drop of whatever poison they had slipped into it. I picked up my heavy linen napkin and brought it to my face, faking a severe choking cough. I hacked loudly, leaning over, drawing every eye at the table away from my plate and toward my supposed respiratory distress. In that split second of confusion, I casually tipped my soup spoon into the large, dense potted fern sitting right beside my chair. I did this 3 rapid times, absorbing the liquid into the thick soil while waving my other hand apologetically to the table. I swallowed hard, acting as though I had just ingested the broth, and took a large gulp of my ice water. Within 5 minutes, I put my performance into high gear. I complained of a sudden throbbing headache. I let my eyelids droop, slurring my words as I told Julian that the room was spinning rapidly. I swayed in my plush dining chair, allowing my vision to blur purposely. I slumped forward, resting my head heavily onto the expensive dining table, and let my body go completely limp. I slowed my breathing, playing dead to the world, while my hearing remained razor-sharp, picking up every single sound in the room. The polite, refined Southern charm in the room vanished the second they thought I was unconscious. The silence was broken by Vivian. Her voice was no longer sweet and motherly. It was sharp, vicious, and completely ruthless. "Grab her hand, Jada," Vivian snapped. Force her thumb on the phone scanner before the Securities and Exchange Commission freezes Julian's accounts on Monday morning. I listened in absolute horror, keeping my eyes shut tight. My perfect fiance, the man who had proposed to me under the stars, grabbed my left arm roughly. He was frantic, his breathing heavy as he tried to press my thumb against my phone screen. He needed my biometric approval to authorize a massive wire transfer. They were trying to steal $2.5 million from my accounts to cover his collapsing Ponzi scheme. "Hurry up, Julian!" Desmond growled, his voice stripped of its usual jovial tone. "The charity funds are completely tapped out. If those investors do not see returns by Tuesday, we are all going to federal prison." Jada laughed cruelly from across the table, the sound echoing off the high ceilings. "It is a good thing a street orphan like her has no family to check in on her. Honestly, if she overdoses on these sedatives tonight, nobody will even ask questions. We can just say the stress of the wedding was too much for her fragile mental state." The sheer evil radiating from the people I had been calling family chilled my blood. They were not just trying to rob me blind. They were actively discussing letting me die to cover their financial tracks. But they hit a massive, impenetrable wall. When I read Trevon's warning text under the table, I had immediately gone into my security settings and disabled my biometric login. The phone now demanded a complex 12-digit alphanumeric passcode that only I knew. Julian cursed loudly, slamming his fist onto the mahogany table, rattling the crystal glasses. "The fingerprint scanner is locked out. It needs her passcode. Wake her up and force her to type it." Vivian demanded, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I cannot," Julian yelled back. "The sedative dose you gave her was enough to knock out a horse. She will not be conscious for hours. I have to call Darius from the IT department. He knows a hacker who might be able to bypass the firewall. Keep an eye on her." I heard Julian's heavy footsteps storm out of the dining room. Knowing my window for escape was closing fast, I let out a low, groggy moan. I fluttered my eyes open slowly, acting incredibly disoriented. I blinked against the chandelier light, playing the role of the confused, sick fiancé perfectly. "What happened?" I slurred, rubbing my temples with a trembling hand. "My chest feels tight. My throat is closing up. I think I am having a severe allergic reaction to something in the soup." Instantly, the Caldwells snapped back into character. The masks of loving, concerned family members slammed back onto their faces with terrifying speed. Vivian rushed to my side, her voice dripping with fake honey and manufactured concern. "Oh, you poor dear. You must just be exhausted from wedding planning. Let me take you upstairs to the guest room to sleep it off." "No," I gasped, struggling to stand up while leaning heavily against the chair back. "My friend had an allergic reaction like this last year. I need to go to the emergency room right now, or I could go into anaphylactic shock." I grabbed my phone from the table, clutching it tightly to my chest. Jada tried to block my path, insisting they would drive me, but I was already booking a rideshare on my screen with shaking fingers. "The Uber is already at the security gate," I lied, stumbling purposefully toward the grand foyer. "I will be fine. I just need to get checked out immediately. Julian can meet me at the hospital later." They tried to stop me, offering me water, trying to grab my phone from my hand, but they were terrified of making a scene on their front lawn, where the wealthy Buckhead neighbors might see. I stumbled out the heavy oak front doors, playing dumb, acting weak and vulnerable. I climbed into the back of the rideshare vehicle that had just pulled into the circular driveway. As the car sped away from the Caldwell estate, my posture instantly straightened. The fake dizziness vanished completely. I looked out the tinted window at the receding mansion, my heart pounding with pure adrenaline and calculated rage. I had walked into that dinner as a bride-to-be, but I was leaving as the architect of their complete and utter destruction. They thought because I grew up without a family, I would be desperate enough to fall for their trap. They had no idea that a black woman who builds an empire from scratch knows exactly how to burn a fake one to the ground. The moment my front door clicked shut, and the heavy deadbolt slid into place, the naive fiancé facade dropped completely. I did not collapse in a puddle of tears. I did not throw my engagement ring against the wall. I walked straight to my home office, booted up my encrypted laptop, and dialed the direct line for the Chase Bank Fraud Department. As a forensic accountant who spent a decade tracking hidden assets and shell companies, I had priority access to senior fraud analysts. A representative named Marcus answered. I verified my identity using my federal credentials and demanded a full audit of the 75 security alerts that had flooded my phone during that miserable dinner at the Caldwell estate. The truth Marcus revealed over the next 20 minutes was staggering. Julian had not just tried to wire money. He had meticulously forged my signature on a massive stack of financial documents. He had listed my entire $4 million portfolio, the wealth I had bled to build from absolute zero, as collateral to prop up his failing hedge fund. The fund was hemorrhaging cash, bleeding out from a series of reckless and highly illegal trades. The wire transfer he attempted at the dinner table was a desperate final lifeline to appease a group of extremely dangerous overseas investors who were demanding their returns. Julian thought I was just an orphaned woman who was blinded by the sparkle of a 6-carat diamond and the illusion of a prestigious Atlanta family. He severely underestimated the woman wearing the ring. I did not just freeze my accounts. I initiated a Level 4 federal lockdown. I attached dual-factor biometric restricted authentication to every single asset I owned. I rerouted all security notifications directly to an encrypted server that only I could access. If Julian even tried to check my balance, the banking system would immediately log his IP address and flag it for wire fraud. I secured my empire behind a digital fortress that no hacker could breach. My phone vibrated on the desk. It was the unknown number again. I am glad you got out. Meet me at the 24-hour diner on Piedmont Road. 2 a.m. Come alone. Signed, Trayvon. I looked at the clock. It was 1:45 in the morning. I grabbed my keys, slid a pepper spray canister into my jacket pocket, and headed back out into the humid Atlanta night. The diner was mostly empty, bathed in harsh fluorescent light, and smelling of stale coffee and bleach. I spotted Trayvon sitting in a corner booth nursing a black coffee. He looked utterly exhausted. The Caldwells always treated Trayvon like the hired help. They openly mocked his modest upbringing, criticized his job as a high school history teacher, and constantly reminded him that he was lucky a Caldwell woman even looked his way. Jada treated him worse than a stray dog parading around Atlanta high society while treating her husband like a disposable prop. I slid into the booth across from him. We skipped the pleasantries. "Why did you save me tonight?" I asked, keeping my voice low and steady. Trayvon looked up, his eyes bloodshot but fiercely sharp. "Because I know what it is like to be their prey, and because I cannot watch them destroy another person who actually worked for what they have." Trayvon leaned forward, placing a thick, unmarked manila folder on the sticky diner table. He opened it, revealing a treasure trove of financial documents, bank statements, and legal notices that painted a picture of absolute financial ruin. "They are broke, Nia. Completely, utterly bankrupt," Trayvon whispered, tapping a finger against the first document. "Vivian likes to play the grand matriarch of Atlanta, but that Buckhead mansion is a house of cards. She has 3 secret mortgages on it. The bank is preparing to foreclose next month." I sifted through the papers, my professional eyes instantly calculating the devastating math. It was worse than I thought, and Jada, I asked, thinking of my arrogant future sister-in-law. Trayvon let out a bitter laugh. "Her entire designer lifestyle is funded by stolen credit cards. She opens accounts under fake LLCs, maxes them out on expensive luxury bags, and trips to Dubai, and then defaults. She tried to open a card in my name last week. That was the final straw." He pushed a second stack of papers toward me. These were marked with the seal of the Securities and Exchange Commission. "Julian is facing a federal indictment." Trayvon continued, his voice dropping even lower. "His hedge fund is a textbook Ponzi scheme. He has been paying old investors with new investors' money for 2 years. The well ran dry 3 weeks ago. That is why they accelerated the wedding. They needed your assets to cover the shortfall before the feds raid his office. They were planning to drain your accounts file for bankruptcy under your name and leave you holding the bag for the federal charges." The sheer audacity of it made my blood run cold. They wanted me to take the fall for a federal crime. They were perfectly willing to let me rot in a federal prison so Vivian could keep hosting her ridiculous country club brunches. Trayvon reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small encrypted flash drive. He set it on the table between us. I managed to clone Julian's master key fob last week, Trevon said. This drive contains the administrative passwords to Julian's internal servers. It gives you backdoor access to his entire operation. The fake ledgers, the offshore accounts, the wire transfers. Everything. I stared at the flash drive. It was the Holy Grail. With this, I did not just have enough to protect myself. I had enough to bury them under a federal penitentiary. But nothing comes for free. I looked Trayvon straight in the eyes. What do you want in return? Trayvon did not hesitate. My son. Jada uses him as a prop for her social media, but she is a terrible mother. If I try to leave her, the Caldwells will use whatever is left of their social influence to crush me in family court. They will take my boy just to punish me. I need full custody, and I need to walk away from this toxic family financially unscathed. I need immunity when the house comes crashing down. I reached out and took the flash drive, slipping it securely into my pocket. You have my word, I said, my voice as cold as ice. I am going to map out every single shell company they own. I will separate your finances from Jada's completely. By the time I am done with them, the Caldwells will not have enough money to hire a traffic lawyer, let alone fight you in family court. You will get your son, Trevon. We shook hands over the diner table. It was not a gesture of friendship. It was a binding contract between two survivors who were about to orchestrate the most satisfying demolition in Atlanta high society history. I drove back to my condo as the sun began to peek over the city skyline. I did not sleep. I brewed a strong pot of coffee, cracked my knuckles, and plugged Trevon's flash drive into my isolated secure network. I spent the next 4 hours operating in complete silence, mapping out the architecture of Julian's financial crimes. The silent grind had officially begun. The deeper I dug into the servers, the more disgusted I became. Julian had categorized his victims in a spreadsheet. He targeted the elderly small business owners and local charities, draining their life savings to fund his luxury car leases and expensive watches. The rage inside me hardened into pure, calculated strategy. I was not going to simply walk away from the wedding. Canceling the engagement would just tip them off, giving them time to hide evidence, flee the country, or find another victim to scam. No, I was going to string them along. I was going to let them believe their trap was working perfectly right, up until the moment I slammed the steel cage shut on their fingers. At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Julian. Good morning, my beautiful bride. I was so worried about you last night. Please tell me you are feeling better. I want to come over and take care of you today. I read the text, my face perfectly blank. I pictured his smug, lying face. I imagined Vivian sitting in her heavily mortgaged mansion, waiting for the confirmation that her son had secured my fortune. I typed my response carefully, infusing it with as much fake, sickening sweetness as I could muster. Good morning, baby. Feeling so much better today. The hospital said it was just a severe allergic reaction to the truffles. I am so sorry I ruined dinner. I love you so much. Cannot wait to see you and talk about our future. I hit send and watched the message turn blue. The bait was set. They thought I was oblivious, compliant, and ready to hand over the keys to my kingdom. They had absolutely no idea that they had just invited a forensic predator into their financial slaughterhouse. The Caldwells wanted to play a game of wealth and legacy. I was going to show them exactly what happens when you mess with a woman who built her own table. Julian arrived at my condo exactly 2 hours after my text. He held a massive bouquet of long-stemmed red roses, his face arranged in a mask of perfect loving concern. He pulled me into a tight embrace, kissing the top of my head while murmuring apologies about how terrified he had been the night before. I buried my face in his chest, inhaling the scent of his expensive designer cologne, and forced myself not to pull away in sheer disgust. I was so scared, Nia, Julian whispered smoothly, leading me to the living room couch. When you rushed out into that Uber, I almost chased the car down the street. I stayed awake all night praying you were okay. I sat next to him, clutching a mug of tea to keep my hands from shaking with rage. The hospital gave me an epinephrine shot and kept me for observation. I lied flawlessly. I am just so relieved it was only an allergy. But Julian, when I woke up this morning, I saw 75 missed calls from my bank. they locked my accounts. Julian did not even flinch. His composure was terrifying. He reached out, taking my hands in his, rubbing his thumb over my engagement ring. "Oh, that. I meant to tell you about that, baby. It is nothing to worry about. Just routine security checks." "Routine checks?" I asked, keeping my voice soft and confused. "They flagged it as potential wire fraud." Julian offered a dismissive, patronizing chuckle. "Banks always overreact to large institutional transfers. I was setting up the framework for our new joint investment portfolio. You remember we talked about merging our assets after the wedding to maximize our yield. I just initiated the preliminary paperwork to get us preferred rates at my fund." The system saw a high-volume request and triggered an automated alert. I already had my team smooth it over. He leaned closer, his dark eyes locking onto mine, deploying the psychological manipulation that had undoubtedly scammed millions from his investors. "Nia, we are getting married in a month. We are building a legacy together. I need to know that we are operating as a single unit. When you keep your finances locked away in separate retail accounts, it makes it incredibly difficult for me to position us for the future. Merging our accounts is not just about money. It is about trust. It is about showing me that you finally consider us a real family." There it was. The ultimate weaponization of my deepest vulnerability. He knew I grew up in the foster care system. He knew my greatest desire was to belong to a real permanent family. He was using my childhood trauma to try and steal $4 million. I looked down at our joined hands, summoning a single perfectly timed tear. I let it roll down my cheek. "You are right," I said, my voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "I am just so used to protecting myself. I have been alone for so long. But you are my family now, Julian. I trust you completely." The relief that washed over his face was palpable. The slight tension in his shoulders evaporated. He smiled a genuine greedy smile and pulled me into another hug. "I knew you would understand, baby. Let us get this sorted out today so we can focus on the wedding." I nodded enthusiastically. "Give me an hour to log into my federal portal and authorize a new joint account. I will set it up so you have full wire privileges." Julian kissed me, promising to take me to a luxurious dinner that evening to celebrate our merged future, and quickly left to head to his office. He probably needed to assure his angry offshore investors that their money was secured. The second the door closed, I wiped the fake tear from my face and walked straight back to my secure laptop. Julian wanted a joint account. I was going to give him one. I logged into my specialized banking portal, utilizing connections I had cultivated through years of investigating financial crimes alongside federal authorities. I did not open a standard checking account. I created what forensic accountants call a honeypot. A honeypot account is a digital trap. On the surface, it looks like a high-yield corporate account holding millions of dollars in liquid cash. It displays fake routing numbers, legitimate-looking balances, and unrestricted wire transfer capabilities. But underneath the interface, it is completely hollow. Every single keystroke, every login attempt, and every transfer request made within that account is instantly recorded, mirrored, and forwarded directly to a secure server at the Federal Bureau of Investigation Wire Fraud Division. I seeded the account with a visible balance of exactly $2.5 million. It was digital phantom money. Then I granted Julian full administrative access. I created a unique login credential for him, ensuring that when he inevitably tried to drain the funds, the digital fingerprint would tie directly to his personal devices and his specific IP address. I texted him the login details with a heart emoji. "All set up, my love. We are officially a team." His reply was instantaneous. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Nia. I love you." I set my phone face down on the desk. He had just signed his own federal indictment. The trap was set, the bait was glowing brightly on his screen, and now all I had to do was wait for him to bite. But I was not going to sit around and wait passively. Trevon had given me the master keys to the Caldwell Kingdom, and it was time to start unlocking doors. I drove to my downtown Atlanta office, locking myself in my soundproof suite. I pulled the blinds, turned off my personal phone, and inserted Trevon's cloned flash drive into a standalone air-gapped computer. As a forensic accountant, my specialty was dissecting complex financial webs and finding the hidden threads that connected dirty money to clean hands. I was about to perform the most satisfying audit of my entire career. I bypassed Julian's initial security firewalls easily. Trayvon's administrative access codes worked flawlessly. Within minutes, I was staring at the raw, unfiltered back end of the Caldwell family's financial network. I decided to start with the patriarch. Desmond Caldwell was celebrated across Atlanta for his prestigious community charity, an organization that ostensibly provided scholarships and housing assistance to underprivileged Black youth. Desmond hosted massive galas, rubbed elbows with mayors and governors, and used his philanthropic status to shield his family from any societal criticism. I opened the charity's main ledger and began cross-referencing the outgoing grants with state tax records. It took me less than 45 minutes to find the massive glaring discrepancies. Desmond was not funding scholarships. He was operating a sophisticated money laundering syndicate. I traced a series of large, tax-deductible donations made to the charity by Julian's hedge fund investors. Once the money entered the charity's accounts, it was immediately fragmented into dozens of smaller payments. These payments were supposedly sent to local community contractors for neighborhood redevelopment initiatives. I ran a background check on the contractors. They did not exist. They were shell companies registered to remote agents in Delaware and Wyoming. I followed the digital trail of the money flowing into those shell companies. The funds bounced through 2 more dummy accounts before landing squarely in Vivian Caldwell's personal banking portfolio. The money meant for underprivileged youth was paying for Vivian's $80,000 country club membership fees. It was funding the lease on Jada's luxury SUVs. It was paying the property taxes on the Buckhead mansion that was currently facing foreclosure. Desmond was actively stealing from his own community to keep his wife draped in designer brands and to maintain their illusion of generational wealth. The sheer depravity of it fueled my focus. I worked continuously for 7 hours, pulling digital receipts, taking screenshots, and downloading encrypted backup files. I compiled a massive dossier of Desmond's tax evasion, wire fraud, and embezzlement. Every single transaction was meticulously documented, time-stamped, and tied directly to Desmond's signature. I then moved on to Jada. Trayvon had mentioned her credit card fraud, but seeing the actual numbers laid out on the screen was staggering. Jada had set up at least 6 different limited liability companies using stolen identities, including the identities of some of the scholarship applicants from Desmond's fake charity. She used these fraudulent companies to open high-limit corporate credit cards. I downloaded the credit card statements. Jada had charged over $400,000 in luxury goods, international vacations, and high-end cosmetic procedures. When the bills came due, she simply abandoned the company and moved on to a new stolen identity. She was leaving a trail of destroyed credit scores in her wake, ruining the financial futures of innocent kids just so she could maintain her status as an Atlanta socialite. I compiled Jada's fraud portfolio right next to Desmond's embezzlement file. The Caldwell family was not a dynasty. They were a highly organized crime syndicate operating behind the guise of Southern charm and high society galas. I leaned back in my ergonomic office chair, rubbing my tired eyes. The screen illuminated the dark room, displaying enough evidence to put the entire family behind bars for decades. They had looked down on me for being an orphan. They had mocked my lack of a prestigious bloodline. They thought my honest, hard-earned wealth was just a piggy bank waiting to be cracked open by their superior intellect. They had no idea that I spent my entire professional life hunting people exactly like them. I saved the final encrypted folder to an external hard drive and locked it in my secure office safe. The first dig was complete. I had the ammunition required to obliterate Desmond and Jada. Now I just needed to secure the final pieces of evidence against Julian and Vivian. They wanted to play games with my life, my money, and my future. I was going to let them plan their perfect, lavish wedding. I was going to let them buy the most expensive champagne and invite the most elite members of Atlanta society. Because when the hammer finally dropped, I wanted every single one of their peers to watch the Caldwell empire burn to ashes. 2 days after my late-night audit, my phone buzzed with a message from Vivian. Darling, Jada and I have booked a private VIP suite at Antoinette's Bridal on Peachtree for noon today. We simply cannot have a Caldwell bride walking down the aisle in something pedestrian. See you there. I read the text taking a slow sip of my black coffee. Antoinette's was the most exclusive, obnoxiously priced bridal boutique in Atlanta. It was the kind of place that required a non-refundable $5,000 deposit just to walk through the front door and try on their inventory. I knew exactly what this was. It was a power play. Vivian and Jada wanted to isolate me in an environment built entirely on generational wealth and high society aesthetics. They wanted to make me feel small, uncultured, and desperate for their validation. I dressed in a sleek, tailored charcoal suit, grabbed my phone, and made sure my voice recording app was pinned directly to my home screen. I was ready for whatever psychological warfare they had planned. When I arrived at Antoinette's, the atmosphere was suffocatingly opulent. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, and the air smelled of imported white roses and expensive champagne. Vivian and Jada were already seated on a plush velvet sofa in the center of the VIP suite, sipping mimosas, while 3 boutique attendants hovered around them anxiously. Nia, finally. Vivian sighed loudly, making sure the boutique owner, a woman named Genevieve, could hear her. We were beginning to think your little accounting job would not let you step away. I told Julian we should just hire a stylist for you, but I suppose every girl wants the experience, even if they do not have a mother of their own to share it with. The backhanded comment about my orphaned status was meant to sting. Jada smirked from behind her champagne flute. I just smiled my perfectly practiced naive smile. Thank you so much for arranging this, Vivian, I said warmly. I am just so grateful to have you both guiding me. For the next 2 hours, they subjected me to a relentless parade of humiliation. Every dress I selected, which leaned toward elegant and understated, was immediately shot down. Jada called them foster care chic under her breath. Vivian loudly announced to the boutique staff that my taste was far too minimal for a wedding of their caliber. She insisted that I simply did not understand the expectations of Atlanta high society because I lacked the proper upbringing. Finally, Vivian ordered the attendants to bring out a massive, heavily beaded ball gown that looked more like a glittering chandelier than a wedding dress. It was gaudy, heavy, and completely opposite to my style. This is the one, Vivian declared to the room, her voice booming with manufactured generosity. It is $15,000, but do not worry your pretty little head about the price tag, Nia. I will personally pay for it. The Caldwell family takes care of its own, and we simply cannot let you embarrass Julian in front of the mayor and the governor. The boutique staff nodded approvingly, murmuring about how lucky I was to have such a generous future mother-in-law. Vivian basked in the glow of their admiration. She loved playing the wealthy savior to the poor, clueless orphan. Now Vivian commanded, waving her hand at the attendants. Put her in it. I want to see the fit. 2 attendants ushered me into the massive private dressing room, helping me step into the heavy gown. Once it was zipped, they stepped out, leaving me alone in front of a floor-to-ceiling mirror. I stared at my reflection. I looked ridiculous, swallowed up by tulle and rhinestones. Before I could change out of it, the heavy velvet curtain was pulled aside. Vivian slipped into the dressing room, letting the curtain fall shut behind her. We were completely alone. The grand, boastful matriarch act instantly vanished, replaced by the same cold, calculating predator I had heard in the dining room during the poisoned soup incident. I slipped my hand into my suit jacket pocket, which was resting on a small chair nearby, and discreetly hit the record button on my phone. It fits perfectly, Vivian said, stepping uncomfortably close to me. Her eyes were hard and devoid of any warmth. Now, Nia, since I am being so generous with this $15,000 dress, there is a tiny administrative matter we need to handle today. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a crisp, folded legal document. She held it out to me alongside a gold fountain pen. What is this? I asked, keeping my voice soft and hesitant. It is just a minor addendum to the prenuptial agreement, Vivian explained smoothly, though her jaw was tense. Julian's hedge fund is undergoing a massive expansion. The board of directors requires all partners to consolidate their spouse's assets under the firm's primary management umbrella. It is a standard compliance protocol. You just need to sign right here at the bottom. I took the document, acting as though the legal jargon was confusing to me. I let my forensic accountant eyes scan the text. It was not a standard compliance protocol. It was a complete surrender of assets. The addendum explicitly stated that upon signing my entire LLC, my business accounts and my $4 million net worth would be irrevocably transferred to Julian's sole legal control. If I signed this, I would be handing them the exact lifeline they needed to escape their federal indictment. Vivian, I said, looking up with wide, innocent eyes. This says I am transferring my business ownership to Julian. I built my firm from scratch. I do not understand why his investors need my company. Vivian's patience snapped. The Southern Belle mask shattered into pieces. You do not need to understand it, Naya. You just need to sign it. You are marrying into a legacy. You are marrying into the Caldwell Empire. You owe us this for elevating you out of your pathetic, lonely little life. Sign the paper. The sheer audacity of her entitlement was almost laughable. She was standing in a bridal boutique trying to strong-arm me out of $4 million while acting like she was doing me a favor. I looked at her and I decided I was done playing the naive victim for today. The temperature in the dressing room plummeted as I dropped my innocent facade. No, I said, my voice completely flat and devoid of emotion. Vivian blinked, genuinely shocked. Excuse me? I said no, Vivian. I handed the document back to her, stepping out of her personal space. I am not signing away the business I built. And frankly, you should stop promising to buy $15,000 dresses when your financial house is burning to the ground. Vivian's face turned a mottled shade of red. How dare you speak to me like that, you ungrateful little street trash? I might be street trash, I replied, staring her down with absolute zero fear. But at least my credit cards work. Your American Express Black card was declined at Saks Fifth Avenue on Tuesday afternoon. And that platinum card you were waving around out there, it bounced twice at the Piedmont Country Club on Thursday morning. You are broke, Vivian. You are drowning in 3 secret mortgages, and you are trying to steal my money to save your son from federal prison. The silence in the dressing room was deafening. Vivian stared at me, her eyes wide with terror and sheer unadulterated rage. I had just stripped away her entire identity. I had ripped off her mask of wealth and exposed the desperate bankrupt fraud underneath. Vivian lost all rational control. With a sharp gasp of breath, she raised her hand and slapped me across the face as hard as she could. The crack of her palm striking my cheek echoed loudly in the confined space of the dressing room. The force of the blow snapped my head to the side. A sharp, stinging heat spread across my skin. For a split second, the only sound was Vivian's heavy, panicked breathing as she realized what she had just done. A normal person might have screamed. A normal person might have slapped her back, tearing the dressing room apart in a fit of justified rage. But I was not a normal person. I was a predator who had just trapped her prey perfectly. I slowly turned my head back to face her. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a single tear. I reached up gently, touching the red mark blooming on my cheek, and I smiled. It was a cold, dead, terrifying smile. Vivian shrank back, her hand trembling. The realization of her mistake was settling in. You should not have done that, I whispered, my voice echoing with lethal calm. I turned my back on her, unzipped the heavy ball gown, and let it drop to the floor in a heap of useless tulle. I calmly stepped back into my charcoal suit, buttoned my jacket, and picked up my phone from the chair. I tapped the screen, stopping the audio recording, and saved the file directly to my secure cloud server. I pushed the velvet curtain aside and walked out into the main suite. Jada and the boutique staff looked up, startled by my sudden exit. They took one look at the bright red handprint on my face and gasped in collective horror. Nia, what happened, Genevieve? The boutique manager rushed forward, her hands flying to her mouth. Vivian decided we have different tastes in fashion, I said loudly and clearly, ensuring every employee and client in the front of the store could hear me. And she expresses her disagreements physically. I will not be purchasing a dress here today. Please cancel the appointment. Jada stood up, her face pale, as Vivian stumbled out of the dressing room behind me, looking like a cornered animal. I ignored them both. I turned directly to Genevieve, leaning in close so only she could hear me. Genevieve, I am going to need a copy of the security camera footage from the hallway, pointing directly at that dressing room curtain. I know it captures the audio and the shadow of the physical altercation. if you send it to my email within the hour. I will ensure this boutique is not named in the upcoming federal indictment against the Caldwell family. Genevieve, a smart businesswoman who knew exactly when to distance herself from toxic clients, nodded frantically. I will have it sent to you immediately, Miss Sterling. Thank you, I said smoothly. I turned and walked toward the heavy glass exit doors of Antoinette's bridal. Vivian was shouting something behind me, a desperate, hysterical attempt to save face in front of the stunned boutique staff, but her voice faded into meaningless static. I stepped out into the bright Atlanta sunlight, the sting on my cheek serving as a beautiful reminder. They had tried to break me with poison, with manipulation, and now with physical violence. But every strike they threw only gave me more receipts, and the payback was going to be biblical. 2 weeks passed. The red mark on my cheek faded, but my absolute commitment to their destruction only grew brighter. Jada, playing the role of the devoted future sister-in-law, insisted on throwing me a bridal shower. She booked the private garden terrace at the Piedmont Country Club. I knew exactly why she chose that location. She wanted to reassert the Caldwell dominance in the very place her mother's credit card had bounced, likely using one of her fraudulent corporate accounts to secure the reservation. I arrived wearing a stunning emerald green sheath dress that cost a fraction of Vivian's preferred brands, but fit me with lethal perfection. The terrace was dripping in excessive floral arrangements and towering champagne towers, but the real spectacle was the guest list. Jada had not invited my friends. She had curated a room of Atlanta's most elite judgmental socialites. And right in the center of the room, sipping mimosas and laughing loudly, were 3 women who certainly did not belong on my guest list. Julian's ex-girlfriends. Let us call them the Legacy Trio. There was Chloe, whose father owned a prominent law firm, Maya, an heiress to a real estate empire, and Simone, a former pageant queen who currently sat on the board of the city's largest art museum. They were gorgeous, dripping in generational wealth, and deliberately invited to make me feel like an inadequate, uncultured street urchin trespassing in their royal court. I glided into the room. Jada rushed over, kissing my cheeks with fake enthusiasm. Nia, I am so glad you finally made it. I invited a few girls who know Julian intimately. I figured you could use some advice on how to handle a Caldwell man. The exes smirked over their crystal flutes. I smiled back, thanking Jada for her incredible generosity. I played the gracious guest, mingling and letting them think their intimidation tactics were working. I accepted a glass of sparkling water and stood quietly near the back of the terrace, observing the predators in their natural habitat. An hour into the event, Jada clinked her manicured fingernail against her champagne glass. The chatter died down. Jada stood at the front of the terrace, radiating malicious joy. Ladies, thank you all for gathering today to celebrate my brother's upcoming wedding to Nia Jada, announced, letting a sympathetic, pitying look wash over her face. When Julian told us he was marrying a self-made woman with no family, we were initially so surprised. It is just so heartbreaking to think of Nia walking down the aisle all alone. No father to give her away. No mother to help her adjust her veil. She has absolutely no one. Chloe and Simone exchanged a knowing, cruel glance. A few older women murmured their hollow sympathies. But that is why the Caldwells are stepping up. Jada continued, raising her glass higher. We are taking her in. We are giving her a name, a legacy, and a true family. Because without Julian, Nia would just be another lost girl from the foster system. The room waited for me to crumble, to cry, to show the shame they were so desperate to project onto me. I stood up from my chair. I walked slowly toward Jada, the heels of my shoes clicking sharply against the stone terrace. Thank you, Jada, I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent crowd. That was a beautifully rehearsed speech. And you are right. I do not have a legacy to fall back on. I had to build my empire using nothing but my own attention to detail. I reached out casually, touching the bright orange leather handbag sitting on the display table next to Jada. It was a Hermes Birkin, the ultimate status symbol of the ultra-wealthy, a bag that commands a $30,000 price tag and a multi-year waiting list. Like this bag, I said loudly, ensuring my voice carried to the back rows where the ex-girlfriends were standing. As a forensic accountant, my entire career relies on spotting inconsistencies that other people miss. It is a survival skill. I picked up the bag. Jada tried to snatch it away, her eyes widening in sudden panic, but I held it firmly out of her reach. For instance, I continued tracing my index finger along the top edge of the leather. A genuine Hermes Birkin uses a very specific saddle stitch. The thread here is perfectly straight, which means it was done by a machine, not hand-stitched by an artisan in Paris. Furthermore, the blind stamp behind the strap lacks the artisan's ID, and the date code is completely out of sequence for the year this color was released. I dropped the heavy counterfeit bag back onto the table. It landed with a dull, unglamorous thud. You bought a counterfeit bag, Jada. A very cheap knockoff. It is fascinating how hard you try to project a legacy of wealth while carrying a synthetic prop manufactured in a sweatshop. But I suppose when you are drowning in fraudulent credit card debt and stealing identities to fund your lifestyle, you have to cut corners somewhere to keep up appearances. The silence on the terrace was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. In Atlanta, high society carrying a fake Birkin while pretending to be old money was the ultimate social crime. It was humiliating, degrading, and completely unforgivable. Chloe and Simone stepped away from Jada as if she were carrying a highly contagious disease. The older socialites whispered furiously to one another behind their hands. Jada's face turned the color of chalk, but I was not finished. Destroying Jada's social standing was just the appetizer. I needed to serve the main course. I walked past the trembling, humiliated Jada and approached a specific table near the garden edge. Seated there was Beatrice Carter, the wife of a highly prominent federal judge in the district. Beatrice was known as the ultimate gatekeeper of Atlanta society and the most powerful gossip in the state. I leaned down, placing my hands on the back of Beatrice's chair. I lowered my voice just enough so only Beatrice and her immediate circle of influential friends could hear me clearly. Mrs. Carter, it is such a pleasure to see you. I hope you and the judge are doing well. I wanted to privately thank you for your generous donations to Desmond Caldwell's community charity last quarter. Beatrice smiled proudly, though her eyes were still darting toward the fake Birkin on the table. Of course, dear, we always support Desmond's initiatives. That is very kind, I whispered, injecting a tone of grave conspiratorial concern into my voice. But as a forensic auditor, I feel morally obligated to warn you. You might want to have the judge's accountant look into those tax deductions immediately. I ran a preliminary audit on Desmond's charity ledger last night. The funds are not going to underprivileged youth. They are being routed through 3 offshore shell companies in Delaware and landing directly in Vivian's personal checking account to pay for her country club fees. The federal authorities have already been alerted to the embezzlement. Beatrice Carter's eyes widened to the size of saucers. Embezzlement, federal authorities. In her world, associating with federal tax fraud was social suicide. She immediately grabbed her phone, her fingers flying across the screen, to text her husband. The women sitting next to her leaned in their faces, masks of sheer terror and aggressive curiosity. The rumor was out. I had just dropped a match into a room full of gasoline. By dinner time tonight, every single elite family in Atlanta would know that the Caldwell empire was under federal investigation. I stood up straight, smoothing the skirt of my emerald dress. I looked back at Jada. She was standing alone by the champagne tower. The ex-girlfriends had completely abandoned her, moving to the other side of the terrace to distance themselves from the unfolding scandal. The whispers around the room grew louder, transforming into a cacophony of judgment and disgust. Jada looked at me, her eyes brimming with humiliated, terrified tears. The golden child of the Caldwell family had just been stripped of her fake wealth and her untouchable status in less than 5 minutes. She grabbed her counterfeit Birkin, burst into loud, ugly sobs, and ran off the terrace, her heels clicking frantically against the stone pathways. She pushed past the country club waitstaff and bolted out the main doors. She did not look back. I remained standing in the center of the beautiful garden terrace. I walked over to the catered buffet, picked up a perfectly glazed strawberry tart, and took a slow, satisfying bite. The sweet taste of victory was far better than any fake legacy they could ever offer me. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to Trayvon. Phase 2 is complete. Pack your bags, the ship is officially sinking. I smiled as the Atlanta socialites around me scrambled to grab their purses and leave desperate to cancel their associations with the Caldwell name before the federal hammer finally fell. I left the Piedmont Country Club with the serene confidence of an apex predator. My phone remained silent. Vivian did not call. Jada did not text. The Caldwell women were too busy dealing with the social radioactive fallout I had just unleashed upon their fake legacy. But I had no time to gloat over a ruined bridal shower. The main event was rapidly approaching, and I needed to be at my command center. I drove straight to my downtown office, swiped my security badge, and locked myself inside my soundproof suite. I fired up my air-gapped monitoring station. The honeypot account I had created for Julian was displayed on my primary monitor in glowing green text. For 3 days, it had sat entirely untouched. Julian had been incredibly cautious, likely waiting for the perfect moment to strike so he could frame the theft as a routine marital transfer. But caution is a luxury that broke men cannot afford. And Julian Caldwell was completely out of time. Trayvon had sent me a brief encrypted update early that morning. 2 of Julian's biggest investors, ruthless men who did not take kindly to bounce dividend checks, had showed up unannounced at Julian's corporate headquarters. They demanded immediate liquidation of their assets. They gave him 48 hours to produce their money, or they were going to bypass the legal system entirely and handle the massive debt collection their own violent way. Julian was trapped in a financial corner with aggressive predators closing in. Desperation makes people stupid, and stupid people make careless digital mistakes. I sat in my ergonomic chair, my eyes glued to the activity log on my monitor. The clock struck exactly 2 in the afternoon. Suddenly, a bright notification pinged across my screen. A successful login. Julian had finally taken the bait. I watched the live keystroke logger track his every move in real time. He was logging in directly from his private office IP address. He navigated straight to the wire transfer portal. He did not even bother trying to make it look like a domestic investment or a standard mutual fund reallocation. He was going straight for the illegal exit strategy. He typed in an offshore routing number. A bank located in the Cayman Islands known for its strict corporate secrecy laws and strict non-extradition policies. Then came the requested amount. He punched in exactly $1 million. He was attempting to drain nearly half of my supposed liquid assets in a single catastrophic transaction to save his own skin and quiet his angry investors. He hit the submit button. I held my breath, watching the custom code execute. The honeypot account functioned absolutely flawlessly. The moment Julian clicked that button, the system did not process a single cent of the money. Instead, it triggered an immediate automated hard freeze. A massive red banner flashed across my screen. Transaction denied, fraud protocol activated. But that was just the superficial response on my end. Behind the scenes, the trap snapped shut with devastating federal force. The honeypot software automatically packaged the precise timestamp, the offshore routing destination, the exact transaction amount, and Julian's specific corporate IP address. It encrypted the data packet and fired it directly through a secure gateway to the Federal Bureau of Investigation Wire Fraud Division. The federal system flagged the attempt as a Priority 1 cybercrime. Julian had just handed the United States government undeniable digital proof of his intent to commit grand larceny and offshore money laundering. I leaned back in my leather chair, a cold smile touching my lips. He was completely trapped in a cage of his own making. I knew exactly what was happening on his end of the screen. His monitor was likely frozen tight, displaying a generic, terrifying banking error message, instructing him to contact a branch manager immediately due to suspicious activity. He was probably frantically clicking his mouse, refreshing the web page, sweating heavily through his custom-tailored Italian suit as the reality of his failure sank in deep. He needed that $1 million today. Without it, his sophisticated Ponzi scheme would inevitably collapse before sunset, exposing his fraud to everyone in Atlanta. I barely had time to finish my cup of black coffee before the heavy glass door of my office suite rattled violently. Julian did not bother checking in with my front desk receptionist. He shoved his way forcefully past her. His face flushed a dark, dangerous shade of crimson. He slammed my office door shut behind him and locked the heavy deadbolt. The polished, charming gentleman who had proposed to me under the stars was entirely gone. In his place stood a frantic, sweating, cornered animal. His expensive silk tie was loosened. His eyes were wild and darting, and his chest heaved rapidly as he marched directly toward my desk. "Nia, what did you do?" Julian yelled, slamming both of his palms down hard on my glass desk. His voice cracked with sheer panic. "The joint account is locked." The security system froze me out completely. "I need that capital transferred to our new portfolio today, or we are going to lose our preferred institutional interest rate. You need to call the bank right now and authorize the immediate release of those funds." I widened my eyes, dropping my voice into a perfectly pitched octave of pure, terrified innocence. I stood up quickly, pressing both hands to my mouth, playing the role of the panicked, helpless fiancé to absolute perfection. "Oh my God, Julian!" I cried out, rushing quickly around the desk to grab his arm. "I am so glad you are here. It is an absolute disaster. The bank called me 10 minutes ago. We were hacked." Julian froze instantly. The remaining color drained completely from his handsome face, leaving him looking sickly and pale. "What are you talking about, hacked?" "Someone managed to get into the joint account." I gasped, sounding as though I were on the very verge of a massive panic attack. The fraud department said a foreign entity tried to wire $1 million to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Can you believe that? They tried to steal our future, Julian? Our entire wedding fund. Julian swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. A thick bead of sweat dripped down his temple. His breathing became incredibly shallow and ragged. "Okay, Nia, you need to calm down," he stammered, his eyes darting frantically around my office, as if looking for an escape route. "Just call them back. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you authorized the transfer for a private investment. I can fix this." I shook my head vigorously, clutching his arm even tighter. "No, baby, you do not understand how serious this is. I told them we absolutely did not authorize that transfer. I told them my fiancé is an honest, brilliant hedge fund manager who would never send our hard-earned money to a shady offshore tax haven. I demanded that they protect us from these cybercriminals." Julian looked like he was going to physically vomit right there on my expensive office rug. "You demanded what?" I smiled inwardly, though my face remained a flawless mask of terrified concern. "I told the bank to escalate the security breach to the federal level immediately. I told them to investigate the IP address of the hacker thoroughly, no matter what it takes, so they can track down the thief and put him in federal prison. They assured me the FBI Cyber Division already has the exact location of the computer that tried to steal our money." Julian stumbled backward, ripping his arm out of my grasp. He hit the edge of the leather guest chair and practically collapsed into it. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He stared at me, with pure, unadulterated terror burning in his eyes. He finally realized the horrifying truth of his situation. The federal government was not looking for a mysterious foreign hacker operating out of a basement in Eastern Europe. They were currently tracking his exact office IP address right here in Atlanta. He had just wired himself a one-way ticket to federal prison, and I had personally handed the FBI the map to his front door. He began to hyperventilate, clutching his chest. "I need a glass of water," he gasped, his perfectly manicured image shattering into a million pathetic pieces. I walked over to the small beverage station in the corner of my office, pouring him a glass of sparkling water with agonizing slowness. I savored every second of his absolute meltdown. The man who had sat at a dining table and coldly plotted my death was now shaking like a terrified child. I handed him the glass, maintaining my sweet, supportive facade. "Do not worry about a thing, Julian," I said softly, looking down at his trembling hands. "The authorities promised me they will find exactly who did this. They said the evidence they collected today is completely undeniable. You have absolutely nothing to worry about, unless of course you have something to hide." Julian choked on his water, coughing violently. He could not even look me in the eye. He set the glass down, muttered a frantic excuse about needing to secure his corporate servers, and bolted out of my office. I watched the door swing shut, the sound of his panicked footsteps echoing down the hallway. The trap had sprung flawlessly. Julian Caldwell was officially a dead man walking. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of my office, watching the Atlanta traffic flow far below, taking a moment to let the adrenaline subside. My phone vibrated against the glass desk. A text from Trayvon flashed on the screen. It was not his usual brief coded message. This one was frantic and completely devoid of his usual careful composure. I need to see you right now. I found Vivian's personal safe hidden behind the bookshelves in the study. You need to see what is inside before you do anything else. Meet me at the botanical gardens near the back entrance. No digital trails. I grabbed my tailored coat and left the building immediately. The Atlanta Botanical Garden was quiet this time of day, a lush green maze that offered perfect privacy away from the prying eyes of Buckhead society. I found Trayvon pacing near a secluded oak tree, clutching a thick, heavy leather binder against his chest. He looked worse than he had at the diner. He looked physically ill, his skin ashen and his breathing shallow. His hands were shaking violently as he held the binder out to me. I knew they were broke, Trayvon said, his voice raw and catching in his throat. I knew they were stealing to maintain their fake lifestyle. But Nia, I had absolutely no idea how evil my mother-in-law actually was until I cracked her mechanical safe this morning. I took the binder from his trembling hands. The leather was cold to the touch. I opened it and began reading the meticulously tabbed pages. It was not a financial ledger. It was a comprehensive, step-by-step legal playbook drawn up by a highly paid, utterly corrupt family law attorney. The title page read, Caldwell Wealth Consolidation and Conservatorship Strategy. My eyes scanned the first few paragraphs, and the breath completely left my lungs. They were not just planning to steal my money and leave me bankrupt. They were planning to steal my actual life. The document outlined a horrific, multi-phase psychological and legal attack. Phase 1 was the wedding and the forced merging of our financial assets. Phase 2 required Julian to get me pregnant as quickly as possible. The wording was incredibly clinical and degrading, referring to me simply as the incubator for the legacy. Phase 3 was where the true nightmare began. The strategy detailed a calculated plan to wait until I was in the third trimester of pregnancy, a time when hormonal shifts and physical stress are at their peak. Then Vivian and Julian planned to petition the state of Georgia for an emergency medical conservatorship over me. I flipped the page, my hands trembling with a cold, terrifying rage. They had obtained my confidential therapy records. Years ago, when I was a teenager navigating the foster system, I lost my parents in a tragic sudden accident. I had undergone intensive grief counseling to cope with the devastating loss. It was the hardest period of my life, a time when I had fought tooth and nail to heal my own mind and build my future. Vivian had hired a private investigator to bribe a clerk at the clinic, illegally acquiring those highly sensitive mental health files. The legal playbook instructed Julian to weaponize those past therapy records. Combined with manufactured claims of severe prenatal depression and erratic behavior, they planned to declare me mentally unfit. They already had a corrupt high-priced psychiatrist on retainer ready to sign a fraudulent affidavit stating I was a danger to myself and my unborn child. The ultimate goal was to have me involuntarily committed to a private psychiatric facility immediately after giving birth. Once I was locked away and stripped of my basic legal rights, Julian would assume full permanent conservatorship over my person and my estate. He would seize total control of my $4 million business, my properties, and every single cent I had ever earned. I would be entirely trapped, unable to hire my own lawyer or access my own bank accounts. But that was not the most devastating part of the plan. I read the final page of the strategy, and a wave of pure visceral nausea hit me. Vivian intended to take my baby. The document explicitly stated that since I would be deemed an unfit mother, Vivian and Desmond would step in to help Julian raise the child in their Buckhead mansion. They planned to legally sever my parental rights while I was heavily drugged in a facility. They were going to steal my child to secure the Caldwell bloodline, ensuring that my wealth would pass directly to their new heir while I rotted away in a padded room completely erased from existence. I closed the leather binder. The silence in the botanical garden was absolute. Trayvon was staring at me, tears of shame and absolute horror standing in his eyes. "I am so sorry, Nia," he whispered. "I thought they were just greedy snobs holding on to a fake legacy. I did not realize they were literal monsters." Jada knew about this. I found text messages on her tablet. She was joking with Vivian about how they were going to redecorate your baby's nursery once you were locked up in the psych ward. Any lingering hesitation I had, any tiny fraction of pity or mercy that might have existed in my heart for Julian evaporated in that exact moment. They did not just view me as a financial mark. They viewed me as livestock, a convenient vessel to breed a wealthy heir to be discarded and psychologically tortured the moment I had served my biological and financial purpose. The gloves were completely off. This was no longer just about protecting my business assets or exposing a fraud. This was a war for my basic human survival. "Trayvon," I said, my voice dropping into a deadly, unshakable calm that surprised even me. "Are your bags packed?" He nodded quickly, swiping a hand across his eyes. "Everything is in a storage unit. I have a burner phone, and I set up a secure apartment for me and my son under a trusted friend's name. They do not know a thing." "Good," I replied, handing the heavy binder back to him. "Guard these documents with your life. We are accelerating the timeline. I am not waiting for the wedding day to destroy them." The hammer drops at the rehearsal dinner tomorrow night. I walked away from the garden, leaving Trayvon to finalize his escape. As soon as I was secure inside my vehicle, I locked the doors, pulled out my encrypted phone, and dialed a direct line to Special Agent Reynolds, my primary contact at the Federal Bureau of Investigation Wire Fraud Division. Reynolds and I had worked together on several high-profile money laundering cases in the past. He knew my work and he trusted my forensic audits implicitly. "Nia," Agent Reynolds answered, his voice crisp and professional. "We received the data packet from your honeypot account this afternoon. The IP address logged a direct hit to Julian Caldwell's corporate server. We have a federal judge reviewing the wire fraud warrant right now. We were planning to move in on his office early Monday morning." "Monday is too late," I said, putting the car in drive and merging onto the highway. Julian is desperate. He realizes the offshore transfer failed, and he is going to start shredding hard drives and burning physical ledgers tonight. You need to raid his office immediately to secure the servers. But I need you to hold the actual arrest warrants for Julian, Vivian, and Desmond until tomorrow evening." There was a long pause on the line. "We usually do not let suspects wander around once we have actionable evidence of federal crimes, Nia. What is happening tomorrow night?" "The Caldwell family is hosting a massive rehearsal dinner at the St. Regis Hotel," I explained, steering my car through the heavy Atlanta traffic. 200 of the most prominent elite members of Atlanta society will be in that ballroom. Mayors, judges, corporate executives, the exact people they have been lying to for decades. If you arrest Julian quietly at his office, Vivian will spin the narrative. She will claim it is a massive misunderstanding, hire expensive lawyers on credit, and play the victim. She will use her social connections to muddy the waters and hide their crimes. I took a sharp breath, the memory of the horrific conservatorship plan burning intensely in my mind. "I am handing you the biggest financial crime syndicate in the state on a silver platter, Reynolds. In exchange, I need you to let me deliver the fatal blow in public. I want them humiliated in front of the very society they are trying to impress. I want their reputation destroyed so thoroughly that no lawyer or politician will ever answer their calls again." Agent Reynolds let out a low, impressed whistle. "You do not play around, do you?" "They plan to institutionalize me and steal my unborn children," I stated coldly. "So no, I am not playing around. I am ending them." "Understood," Reynolds replied, his tone shifting to pure tactical execution. "I will dispatch a cyber unit to secure Julian's office servers right now under a routine compliance check to prevent him from destroying evidence. We will execute the primary arrest warrants for Julian, Vivian, and Desmond tomorrow night at exactly 8:30. Send me the precise ballroom location at the St. Regis." You will have it, I promised. I disconnected the call and gripped the steering wheel. The plan was flawlessly set. I spent the remainder of the evening coordinating the final logistics of my vengeance. I contacted a high-end audiovisual technician, paying him a premium rate in cash to handle the projector and sound system at the rehearsal dinner. I provided him with a highly encrypted USB drive detailing the precise millisecond he needed to cut Desmond's microphone and switch the video feed. I wanted the audio crisp and the visuals inescapable. Then I drafted the final documents for Trevon. Using my elite legal connections, I fast-tracked a brutal divorce petition and a bulletproof emergency custody order based on Jada's extensive credit card fraud and criminal liability. Trevon would walk into that dinner ready to serve his wife with the ultimate reality check. I opened my closet and stared at the elegant custom-tailored white silk dress I had purchased for the rehearsal dinner. Vivian had demanded I wear white to symbolize my pure, incredibly lucky entry into their prestigious family. I ran my hand over the smooth fabric. I was going to wear it. But I was not wearing it as a naive bride. I was wearing it as their executioner. Julian texted me right before midnight. "Good night, my beautiful future wife. I am so excited for tomorrow. We are going to show the world how perfect we are together." I did not reply. The Caldwells thought they were the smartest predators in Atlanta. They thought my trauma made me weak, compliant, and easy to conquer. They had plotted to steal my wealth, my sanity, and my future children. They had dug a very deep, very dark grave for me. Tomorrow night, I was going to push every single one of them into it and bury them alive. The sun rose over Atlanta, casting a harsh, unforgiving light across my bedroom. I did not sleep a single wink yet. I had never felt more awake, more intensely alive. Today was the day. I moved through my morning routine with mechanical precision. Every action was calculated, every breath controlled. I drank my black coffee, reviewed the encrypted federal files one last time, and confirmed with my audiovisual technician that all systems were completely locked and loaded. The St. Regis was expecting us by 6 in the evening. I spent the entire afternoon at a high-end Buckhead salon, allowing a team of stylists to pin my hair and apply flawless camera-ready makeup. Vivian had demanded I wear a custom-tailored white silk dress to symbolize my pure, incredibly lucky entry into their prestigious bloodline. I slipped the dress on, smoothing the expensive fabric over my hips. If I was going to be the executioner tonight, I was going to look the absolute part. The St. Regis Atlanta is a towering monument to Southern luxury. It features imported marble floors, cascading crystal chandeliers, and an atmosphere that demands absolute respect from anyone who walks through its heavy brass doors. Vivian Caldwell had rented out the massive Astor ballroom, sparing absolutely no expense to maintain her rapidly crumbling facade. They had invited 200 of the most influential wealthy members of the Black elite. The guest list was a who is who of Atlanta high society. Mayors, federal judges, real estate moguls, and corporate titans were all scheduled to attend. These were the exact people Vivian desperately needed to impress the people whose validation she craved more than oxygen, and the very investors Julian had been scamming for years. I arrived early, bypassing the main valet and slipping through a discreet side entrance to observe them before making my grand appearance. From a hidden vantage point on the mezzanine overlooking the ballroom, I watched the Caldwell family command the room. They looked like flawless royalty. Vivian wore a custom beaded emerald gown that screamed generational wealth, though I knew for a fact the credit card used to purchase it had bounced twice before she finally secured a fraudulent line of credit under a fake limited liability company. She was shouting orders at the hotel staff, micromanaging the placement of the centerpieces, desperate to maintain total control over an environment that was about to shatter. Desmond stood by the mahogany bar laughing boisterously with a prominent local politician. He held a glass of expensive bourbon in his hand, playing the role of the benevolent patriarch. But from my elevated view, the cracks were glaringly obvious. Desmond was sweating profusely, wiping his forehead with a silk handkerchief every few minutes. He was downing his drinks entirely too fast, signaling the bartender for refills before he had even finished his glass. His laughter was too loud, too forced, echoing with the desperate panic of a man who knew the federal authorities were investigating his fake community charity. Jada was draped over a velvet lounge chair, sipping champagne and taking selfies for her social media followers. She wore a diamond necklace that I knew was paid for with a stolen identity. She looked smug, arrogant, and completely oblivious to the fact that her entire world was currently standing on the edge of a sheer cliff. And then there was Julian. Julian was a psychological mess wrapped in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo. He paced aggressively near the floral arrangements, constantly checking his phone. His jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might shatter. I knew exactly what was running through his panicked mind. The federal lock on my honeypot account had completely stonewalled his offshore wire transfer. His dangerous overseas investors were breathing down his neck, demanding their money by tomorrow morning. He was sweating bullets, entirely trapped in the financial corner I had expertly painted him into. Yet despite the walls closing in on him, he still believed he held the winning hand. I watched him smooth his lapels, take a deep breath, and paste on a charming, predatory smile as the first wave of elite guests began to arrive. He genuinely believed that after the champagne toasts and the tearful speeches tonight, he could isolate me in our luxury hotel suite and manipulate me into manually overriding the bank freeze. He thought he could use my supposed desperation for a family, my childhood trauma, to force my signature and steal my $4 million empire. He thought I was just a naive pawn. My phone vibrated sharply against the silk of my clutch. A text message lit up the screen. I am in parking level 3, section C, signed Trevon. I turned away from the mezzanine railing and took the service elevator down to the subterranean parking garage. The air was remarkably cool down here, smelling faintly of exhaust fumes and damp concrete. The contrast from the opulent ballroom above was staggering. I walked past rows of luxury vehicles until I found Trevon leaning against a modest, unassuming sedan. He was completely hidden from the valet security cameras. He was not wearing a tuxedo. He wore comfortable dark jeans and a heavy jacket. He looked like a man who had finally dropped a massive, suffocating weight off his shoulders. "Are you ready?" I asked, my heels clicking softly against the pavement as I approached him. Trevon nodded, a profound, heavy sense of relief washing over his tired features. "My bags are packed and loaded in the trunk. My son is safely at my mother's house down in Savannah. Jada thinks he is at a weekend sleepover with his cousins. She did not even bother to call and check on him today. She was too busy getting her hair done." I reached into my designer clutch and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. I held it out to him. Inside was $50,000 in untraceable, non-sequential cash. I had withdrawn it over the past week in carefully structured amounts to avoid triggering any secondary banking alerts. "This is for you," I said, my voice steady and resolute. "To start your new life. To hire the absolute best custody lawyers in the state of Georgia. To make sure your son never has to spend another single day in that toxic, narcissistic environment." Trevon hesitated for a fraction of a second before taking the envelope. His hands shook slightly as he grasped the heavy package. He looked down at the cash, then back up at me, his eyes shining with intense, unshed tears. "Nia, I do not know how to ever thank you. You did not just save yourself from these monsters. You saved my boy. You gave us our lives back. You saved us both," I corrected him, maintaining direct eye contact. "You gave me the keys to their kingdom when I needed them most. Now it is time to burn it completely to the ground. Do you have the paperwork ready?" Trevon reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a crisp, folded legal document. "The divorce papers," he said, his voice hardening with a fierce, newfound resolve. "Signed, notarized, and ready to be served. I also have the emergency custody filing citing her extensive credit card fraud, identity theft, and criminal liability. The moment the federal agents put her parents in handcuffs, I am taking full, irrevocable custody of my son." We stood there in this dimly lit garage, two outsiders, who had been brought into the Caldwell family merely to be used, financially drained, and eventually discarded. They had underestimated our intelligence and mocked our lack of generational wealth. We had both survived their calculated psychological warfare, and now we were dictating the absolute terms of their surrender. "Get back upstairs," Trevon said. offering a tight, deeply respectful nod. Put on your best smile. Give them exactly what they deserve. I will be waiting right outside the ballroom doors. I will walk in right behind the federal agents. I turned and walked back toward the service elevator. The thick envelope of cash had left my hands, but the absolute certainty of victory filled my chest, making me feel 10 feet tall. I stepped into the elevator car and hit the button for the main lobby. I watched the numbers tick upward, bringing me closer to the battlefield. I adjusted my white silk dress, checked my reflection in the mirrored elevator doors, and pinned a flawless, radiant smile onto my face. The calm before the storm was officially over. It was time to unleash the hurricane. The elevator doors chimed and slid open, revealing the bustling golden-lit lobby of the St. Regis. The wealthy elite of Atlanta milled about in their expensive gowns and tailored suits, sipping champagne and exchanging hollow pleasantries. I stepped out, my posture perfectly straight, my head held high. I glided toward the grand entrance of the Astor Ballroom, ready to take my seat at the table. Julian was waiting inside, completely unaware that he was smiling at his own executioner. The performance was about to begin, and I was going to deliver a show they would never forget. I pushed open the heavy mahogany doors of the Astor Ballroom and stepped into a glittering illusion. The sheer scale of Vivian Caldwell's desperate final flex was staggering to witness. She had transformed the luxurious space into an overwhelming display of manufactured wealth. Thousands of imported white orchids cascaded from the vaulted ceilings, creating a fragrant canopy that smelled distinctly of financial ruin. A 10-piece jazz ensemble played smoothly in the corner, their melodies floating over the clinking of baccarat crystal and the hushed, arrogant chatter of Atlanta high society. Photographers circled the room like well-dressed vultures, their camera flashes illuminating the fake smiles of federal judges, real estate tycoons, and local politicians. Every single detail in this room was a calculated lie, funded by stolen money. As a forensic accountant, my mind automatically tabulated the cost of Vivian's grand deception. The floral arrangements alone easily surpassed $40,000. The vintage champagne flowing freely into towering pyramids of coupe glasses was at least another $20,000. I knew for an absolute fact that the catering deposit had bounced twice before Vivian managed to secure a fraudulent line of credit using a shell company registered in Jada's name. They were literally drinking champagne bought with stolen identities. Julian spotted me immediately. He broke away from a group of wealthy older investors, the very men he was currently scamming, and rushed to my side. He grabbed my waist, pulling me close for the flashing cameras. He looked incredibly handsome in his custom tuxedo, but up close the illusion fractured. I could feel the frantic, rapid pounding of his heart against my shoulder. A thin sheen of nervous sweat coated his forehead, ruining his perfectly groomed appearance. His eyes were wide and manic, silently begging me to play along. He desperately needed these investors to see him as a stable, wealthy man marrying a highly successful woman. He leaned down, pressing a desperate kiss to my cheek. "You look absolutely breathtaking, Nia." Julian whispered, his voice tight with barely concealed panic. "Everyone is staring at you. Just keep smiling, baby. We are going to have a perfect night." I smiled brilliantly for the cameras, projecting the exact image of a blissfully happy bride. "I look forward to the rest of the evening, Julian. It is going to be unforgettable." Vivian materialized through the crowd, gliding across the marble floor in her emerald gown. She hooked her arm through mine with a viciously tight grip, dragging me toward a circle of influential socialites. She completely ignored the bright red handprint she had left on my cheek at the bridal boutique days earlier, a mark I had expertly concealed with high-end foundation. Tonight, she was playing the gracious, loving matriarch, eager to show off her new acquisition. "Ladies, look who finally arrived," Vivian announced loudly, ensuring the nearby photographers captured the moment. "Our beautiful Nia. We are just so thrilled to bring her into the Caldwell fold. It is such a blessing to give a home to someone who had to grow up with absolutely nothing." The socialites cooed in manufactured sympathy, their eyes scanning my white silk dress, silently calculating its cost. I maintained my lethal composure. I did not flinch. I did not break character. I engaged in their hollow small talk, exchanging pleasantries with men and women whose bank accounts I had already flagged for federal review. I shook hands with the mayor. I smiled at the wives of Julian's victims. I watched Jada hovering near the bar, downing her third martini, her eyes darting nervously around the room as if expecting the counterfeit police to arrest her for the fake jewelry she was wearing. The tension in the ballroom was a physical weight pressing against my chest. Every laugh felt strained, every clink of a glass echoed with impending doom. The Caldwell family was a sinking ship, and they were throwing a lavish masquerade ball on the upper deck, while the lower decks flooded with federal warrants. They had no idea I had already handed the coordinates to the Coast Guard. A sharp, demanding ringing sound cut through the ambient noise. Desmond Caldwell was standing at the head table on the elevated stage, tapping a silver spoon against his crystal champagne flute. The room gradually quieted down, the elite guests turning their attention to the patriarch of the Caldwell Empire. Desmond adjusted his silk tie, puffing out his chest as he grasped the microphone. He beamed down at the crowd, radiating a toxic, completely unearned confidence. Family, friends, distinguished guests. Desmond boomed, his deep voice rolling across the ballroom. Thank you all for gathering tonight to celebrate the union of my brilliant son Julian and his beautiful bride Nia. The room erupted in polite, wealthy applause. Julian squeezed my hand under the table. I let my fingers rest limply in his grasp, staring dead ahead at Desmond. We Caldwells have always understood the profound importance of legacy. Desmond continued, pacing slightly on the stage to command the room. In Atlanta, our name stands for integrity, generational wealth, and an unwavering commitment to our community. We build empires, but more importantly, we build families. The sheer, unadulterated hypocrisy of his words made bile rise in my throat. This man was actively laundering money meant for impoverished black youth to pay for his wife's country club fees. He was standing on a stage preaching about integrity while facing decades in federal prison for embezzlement. When Julian first brought Nia home to us, we knew she was special, Desmond said, placing a dramatic hand over his heart. Nia did not come from a prominent background. She did not have the advantages of a strong family name, but she had grit. We recognized that raw potential immediately, and we knew that by bringing her into the Caldwell family, by welcoming her into our prestigious bloodline, we could give her the legacy she always dreamed of having. To Julian and Nia, may your future be as bright and secure as the Caldwell name itself. The guests raised their glasses, cheering loudly. Julian turned to me, a sickeningly sweet smile plastered across his sweating face. Vivian dabbed at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, playing her part flawlessly for the photographers. The applause began to die down, transitioning back into the low hum of expensive networking. This was my moment. I slipped my hand out of Julian's sweaty grip. I stood up slowly, the white silk of my dress catching the light of the crystal chandeliers above. I moved with absolute predatory grace. I did not rush. I did not show a single ounce of anxiety. I walked purposefully up the small set of carpeted stairs onto the main stage. Desmond looked slightly confused, but maintained his benevolent smile, assuming I was coming up to give a tearful, grateful response to his condescending speech. I reached out and took the microphone directly from his hand. His fingers gripped the metal tightly for a fraction of a second before yielding to my firm, undeniable pull. I stepped to the center of the stage, looking out over the sea of 200 powerful, influential faces. I saw Julian half stand from his chair, a shadow of genuine panic crossing his features. I saw Vivian freeze, her champagne glass hovering inches from her lips. I took a deep, centering breath. My voice when I spoke was smooth, commanding, and utterly lethal. "Thank you, Desmond," I said, my voice projecting crystal clear through the state-of-the-art sound system. That was a truly moving speech about legacy and integrity. And thank you to Vivian, Jada, and Julian. Over the past year, you have all shown me exactly what it means to be part of the Caldwell family. I paused, letting the silence stretch out over the ballroom. The guests looked up at me with rapt attention, expecting a heartwarming tale of an orphan finally finding a home. Growing up without parents, I always wondered what true family loyalty looked like. I continued my gaze locking directly onto Vivian in the front row. You taught me that family means doing whatever it takes to survive. You taught me the extreme lengths people will go to in order to protect their assets, their reputation, and their absolute control. You taught me that sometimes that the most dangerous predators are the ones sitting right across from you at the dinner table. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. This was not the standard rehearsal dinner speech. The wealthy guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Julian was fully standing now, his face drained of all blood, looking like he was about to bolt for the exit. Desmond took a step toward me on the stage, his hands raised in a placating gesture, but I held up a single finger, stopping him dead in his tracks. Because I am so incredibly grateful for these invaluable lessons, I decided I could not possibly walk down the aisle without giving something back to all of you, I announced, my voice slicing through the growing tension like a freshly sharpened blade. I have prepared a very special, highly personalized gift for every single person in this room tonight. I turned my head slightly and made a sharp, deliberate nod toward the back of the ballroom. Instantly, the heavy oak doors swung open. But it was not the St. Regis catering staff carrying dessert trays. I had personally hired an independent, highly vetted team of 20 private waitstaff for this exact moment. They marched into the ballroom in perfect synchronized unison. They carried massive silver platters stacked high with beautiful midnight blue velvet boxes. Each box was tied with a crisp silver ribbon. Please do not be shy, I instructed the crowd watching as the waitstaff began distributing the velvet boxes to the bewildered guests. Make sure every single person at your table receives one, mayor, judges, investors. I want all of you to open your gifts at the exact same time. It is a vital piece of the Caldwell legacy, and I believe in full, unrestricted transparency. I stood on that stage, a solitary figure in white silk radiating absolute authority. The panic in the Caldwell family had officially reached critical mass. Vivian was hyperventilating, clutching her pearl necklace as a waiter handed her a blue velvet box. Julian was desperately trying to push his way through the crowded tables to reach the stage, but the boxes were already in their hands. The ribbons were already being untied. The exquisite, horrifying reality of their destruction was sitting right in front of them, wrapped in velvet, waiting to be unleashed upon Atlanta society. Please, open your gifts, I instructed, my voice calm, projecting effortlessly over the confused murmurs of the elite crowd. I stood center stage, bathed in the spotlight, watching the Caldwell family freeze. The waitstaff stood motionless, their duty fulfilled. I considered a toaster, or perhaps a set of monogrammed napkins. I continued pacing slowly, letting the silence stretch. But I decided on something far more valuable: transparency. Go ahead, open them. The collective rustle of velvet and satin ribbons echoed through the Astor Ballroom. 200 prominent guests, mayors, judges, corporate executives, and Julian's wealthy, oblivious investors opened their custom blue boxes. Inside each box sat a sleek silver USB drive and a single neatly folded sheet of high-quality cardstock. What you are holding is a summary of the Caldwell legacy, I announced, my voice slicing through the heavy, perfumed air. A legacy built entirely on theft, fraud, and the exploitation of the very community you claim to uplift. I saw Beatrice Carter, the influential judge's wife, unfold her cardstock summary. Her jaw physically dropped. The gasp that swept through the room was immediate and visceral. If you look at the printed summary, you will find 3 key items, I said, maintaining absolute, unwavering eye contact with the crowd. First, the 3 active foreclosure notices on Vivian and Desmond's Buckhead estate. The mansion we are supposedly celebrating tonight is currently owned by the bank. They are entirely bankrupt. Vivian let out a strangled, high-pitched shriek. She lunged forward, nearly knocking over a towering centerpiece of white orchids. Nia stopped this instantly. You are insane. I ignored her completely, my focus laser-sharp. Second, I continued, my voice steady against her rising panic. You will find a detailed ledger of Desmond Caldwell's esteemed community charity. It outlines how over $4 million meant for underprivileged Black youth was systematically laundered through shell companies in Delaware directly into Vivian's personal checking account to pay for her country club memberships and Jada's counterfeit designer lifestyle. Desmond slumped back into his chair, his face turning a terrifying shade of gray. He clutched his chest, his mouth opening and closing without sound, the illusion of the powerful patriarch completely shattered. And finally I said, turning my gaze directly onto Julian, who was frozen in place, staring at me with pure, unadulterated terror. The USB drives contain the complete financial breakdown of Julian Caldwell's hedge fund. It is not a hedge fund. It is a textbook Ponzi scheme. The files contain the names of every victim he has scammed, the offshore accounts he attempted to use to hide the stolen funds, and the undeniable proof that he intended to drain my entire $4 million net worth to cover his federal crimes. The ballroom erupted. It was not a murmur anymore. It was a chaotic, furious uproar. The investors Julian had been courting, the men who had trusted him with their fortunes, stood up from their tables, their faces red with absolute rage. "You lying orphan!" Julian finally screamed, breaking his paralysis. He charged toward the stage, his eyes wide and manic, his expensive tuxedo jacket flapping open. "She is lying. She is a crazy, bitter orphan making this up." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I pulled a small, sleek remote control from the pocket of my white silk dress and pointed it directly at the massive projector screen hanging behind the stage. "Let us see who is lying," I said coldly, and pressed the button. The screen flickered to life. The high-definition display bypassed the planned romantic slideshow and instead showed crystal-clear security footage from Antoinette's bridal boutique. The entire ballroom went dead silent, captivated by the high-quality video. They watched in stunned horror as Vivian, the supposedly elegant matriarch, cornered me in the dressing room. They saw her thrust the fraudulent prenuptial addendum at me. They saw my calm refusal. And then they watched in high definition as Vivian Caldwell raised her hand and viciously slapped my face. The loud, sharp crack of the slap echoed through the state-of-the-art sound system I had rented. A collective gasp of absolute shock rippled through the 200 guests. Beatrice Carter covered her mouth with her hands. But the visual was just the appetizer. The screen transitioned to a black background with a simple audio waveform pulsing in the center. Now I said, my voice echoing over the stunned crowd, "Let us listen to what the Caldwell women discuss when they think no one is listening." This audio was recorded 3 days ago directly from Jada's phone. The clear, unmistakable voices of Jada and Vivian filled the ballroom. "Mom, what if she doesn't sign the transfer papers before the wedding?" Jada's voice whined through the speakers. "Then we proceed with the contingency plan," Vivian's cold, calculating voice replied. "Julian will ensure she gets pregnant immediately. Once she is in her 3rd trimester, we use her old foster care therapy files to declare her mentally unstable. We institutionalize her, take the baby to secure the legacy, and Julian assumes full conservatorship over her business. She will be locked away, and we will control every cent she ever made." The silence in the room was suffocating. The sheer calculated evil of their plan hung in the air, toxic and undeniable. The guests were staring at Vivian and Jada with absolute raw disgust. The elite facade was not just cracked, it was pulverized into dust. "And if she gets suspicious," Jada's voice asked on the recording. "Then we do what we have to do," Vivian replied, her tone chillingly casual. Slipping those sedatives into her mushroom bisque at dinner was just a test run. A girl with no family has no one to ask questions if she suffers a sudden tragic medical complication. We will simply play the grieving family and take what is ours. The recording ended. The Astor Ballroom descended into absolute, unprecedented chaos. The elite guests, the pillars of Atlanta society, were standing up in mass panic and fury. Women were screaming. Men were shouting for hotel security. Dozens of people pulled out their smartphones, recording the utter meltdown of the Caldwell empire. Vivian scrambled up from her table, her emerald gown catching on a chair. She rushed toward the stage, her face twisted in pure hysterical panic. "Turn it off!" she shrieked, clawing at the air trying to reach the projector. "Turn it off, you ungrateful wretch!" Desmond remained slumped in his chair, gasping for air, clutching his chest as the reality of his imminent federal indictment crushed him. Jada stood frozen by the bar, trembling violently, as the wealthy socialites she had desperately tried to impress stared at her with sheer unfiltered revulsion. She looked around the room, her eyes wide, seeking any shred of support, but found only judgment and disgust. Julian, his face a mask of primal fury, finally reached the stage. He lunged at me, his hands outstretched, screaming obscenities, his carefully crafted persona completely obliterated. I stood my ground, my posture perfectly straight, my expression cold and immovable. He thought his physical intimidation would break me. He was wrong. Before his hands could even graze the silk of my dress, the heavy mahogany doors at the back of the Astor ballroom burst open with tremendous force. Federal agents, dozens of them, wearing dark windbreakers with FBI and SEC emblazoned across the back. They marched into the chaotic, glittering room with absolute synchronized authority. The cavalry had arrived, Section 11, 1,500 words. Julian did not care about the flashing cameras, the gasping crowd, or the sudden suffocating silence that had fallen over the Astor ballroom. He lunged up the carpeted stairs of the main stage, his hands curled into aggressive fists, his face contorted into a mask of pure, unhinged rage. "You lying, pathetic orphan," he screamed, his voice cracking with absolute hysteria as he closed the distance between us. "I will kill you. I will tear your entire life apart." He was barely 3 feet away from me. I did not blink. I did not flinch. I stood my ground, my posture perfectly rigid, my eyes locked on his desperate, sweating face. I knew exactly what was happening behind him. "Federal agents, nobody move. Stay exactly where you are." The command boomed through the ballroom, amplified by a heavy megaphone that completely overpowered the chaotic screams of the elite guests. Julian froze mid-lunge. He whipped his head around, his eyes widening in sheer primal terror. A massive swarm of federal agents marched down the center aisle of the ballroom. They moved with absolute terrifying precision. Dark windbreakers with bold yellow FBI and SEC lettering slashed through the sea of designer gowns and expensive tuxedos. The Atlanta high society guests scrambled rapidly out of their way, pressing themselves against the silk-covered walls, dropping their crystal champagne flutes, utterly terrified of being caught in the crossfire of a massive federal raid. Leading the pack was Special Agent Reynolds. He looked sharp-focused and entirely ruthless. He locked eyes with me for a fraction of a second, offering a single barely perceptible nod of professional respect before turning his lethal attention directly to my former fiance. Julian stumbled backward, his hands shooting up into the air as 2 heavily armed agents rushed the stage. He tripped over the thick microphone cord, falling hard onto the polished wood floor right at my feet. "Get off me!" Julian shrieked, kicking wildly as the agents grabbed his arms, twisting them forcefully behind his back. "This is a mistake. Do you know who my family is? Do you know who my father is? We run this city." Julian Caldwell, Agent Reynolds announced, his voice carrying clearly across the silent, terrified ballroom. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, interstate money laundering, and operating an unlicensed financial scheme. You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you use it immediately." The harsh metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut echoed through the microphone I still held by my side. The sound was incredibly satisfying. It was the sound of a dangerous predator finally being caged. The very investors Julian had been actively scamming, the men who had trusted him with their generational wealth, pushed their way to the front of the crowd. They watched with cold, unforgiving eyes as the golden boy of Atlanta finance was hauled roughly to his feet, his expensive custom tuxedo wrinkled and stained with nervous sweat. "Nia, tell them," Julian begged, suddenly shifting from violent rage to pathetic desperation as the agents pulled him toward the stage stairs. "Tell them it was a joint account. Tell them you authorized the transfer. Baby, please, we are getting married." I looked down at him. The man who had planned to drug me, institutionalize me, and steal my unborn child was now weeping openly, begging for my mercy in front of 200 people. I took a step forward, bringing the microphone to my lips. "I do not know you, Julian," I said, my voice echoing through the massive room, chillingly calm. "And I certainly do not finance federal criminals. Have a safe trip to Federal Holding." Julian sobbed loudly as the agents dragged him down the center aisle, parading him past the disgusted faces of the Atlanta elite. While Julian was being escorted out, a second tactical team moved swiftly toward the head table. Desmond Caldwell was still slumped heavily in his dining chair. He was clutching his chest, breathing rapidly, attempting to play the role of a frail, sick old man suffering a sudden medical emergency. He clearly hoped the paramedics would save him from the humiliation of handcuffs. "Nice try, Desmond," a senior SEC investigator said, stepping around the massive floral centerpiece. "The paramedics are waiting outside, but you are not avoiding this reality." Desmond Caldwell, "We have federal warrants for your arrest regarding massive tax evasion, charity fraud, and attempted grand larceny." Desmond let out a pathetic whimper. His powerful, booming patriarch voice was entirely gone. He offered no resistance as the agents pulled his arms behind his back and secured the heavy steel cuffs. The great philanthropist of Atlanta, the man who stole from marginalized communities to fund his luxury country club lifestyle, looked exactly like what he was: a weak, cowardly thief stripped of his stolen power. Vivian, however, did not go quietly. She scrambled backward, her emerald gown catching on the edge of the dining table, tearing the expensive fabric loudly. She bumped heavily into Beatrice Carter, grabbing the prominent judge's wife by the arm in a desperate plea for social salvation. "Beatrice, tell them," Vivian screamed, her perfectly styled hair falling in messy strands across her tear-streaked face. "Tell them who we are. Call the judge. Call the mayor. This is a setup by that vindictive street trash." Beatrice Carter looked at Vivian with pure, unfiltered revulsion. She ripped her arm out of Vivian's desperate grasp, taking a deliberate step back, physically distancing herself from the radioactive social ruin of the Caldwell matriarch. "Do not ever speak to me again, Vivian," Beatrice said, her tone dripping with absolute disdain. "You are a complete disgrace to this city." Vivian let out an anguished wail as a female federal agent grabbed her wrist. She thrashed and kicked, fighting the officers with everything she had left. "I am Vivian Caldwell," she shrieked, her voice cracking in hysterical panic. "You cannot do this to me. I own this city. I am a legacy." "You are bankrupt, Vivian," the agent replied coolly, forcing her arms behind her back and securing the steel cuffs tightly. "And you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit grand larceny." I watched from the stage as Vivian was marched down the aisle, screaming and sobbing, her expensive emerald dress ripped and ruined. The photographers she had hired to document her perfect high society triumph were now frantically snapping pictures of her federal arrest. Tomorrow morning, her tear-stained, mascara-smeared face would be on the front page of every publication in the state. The ballroom was in a state of stunned, horrific awe. The powerful Caldwell empire had been systematically dismantled and handcuffed in less than 10 minutes. But there was one piece of the puzzle left to resolve. Jada stood completely alone by the mahogany bar. The elite socialites she had spent her entire life trying to impress had formed a wide circle around her, treating her like a toxic pariah. She was trembling violently, her hands clutching her counterfeit Birkin bag against her chest like a protective shield. She watched her mother, her father, and her brother being hauled away by federal agents, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror. She looked around frantically, desperate for a lifeline. She saw Trayvon stepping out from behind a group of federal agents near the main entrance. He walked slowly with quiet, undeniable power, straight toward the center of the room. Trayvon, Jada cried out, rushing forward, her high heels clicking erratically against the marble floor. "Trayvon, baby, you have to help us. Call your lawyer. Get the bail money. We have to fix this." Trayvon stopped a few feet away from her. He did not reach out to comfort her. He did not offer a reassuring smile. He stood tall, his shoulders relaxed, looking at the woman who had belittled, humiliated, and financially abused him for years. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick legal manila envelope. Jada reached for it eagerly, assuming it was a stack of emergency cash or a legal defense strategy. Trayvon did not hand it to her. He simply let it drop from his fingers. The heavy envelope hit the marble floor with a resounding thud, sliding perfectly to rest against the toes of her designer shoes. "What is this?" Jada asked, her voice trembling as she looked down. "Those are the divorce papers," Trayvon said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent ballroom. "Signed and filed with the Fulton County Court this afternoon. and right beneath them is the emergency full custody filing for my son. Jada gasped, taking a stumbling step backward. You cannot take my baby. I am a Caldwell. I will destroy you in court. Trevon let out a soft, humorless laugh. With what money, Jada? The accounts are frozen. Your parents are going to prison. You are currently holding a fake bag wearing stolen diamonds and standing in a room full of people who will never answer your phone calls again. Jada opened her mouth to scream, to hurl another barrage of toxic insults, but Trayvon held up a single hand, silencing her completely. Oh, and one more thing, Trayvon added, his tone incredibly smooth and utterly devoid of mercy. You might want to figure out how you are getting home tonight. Your leased Porsche was just repossessed in the valet lot. The tow truck driver said you are 4 months behind on the payments. The final devastating blow landed with absolute perfection. Jada's knees gave out. She collapsed onto the marble floor of the St. Regis ballroom, dropping her counterfeit bag, sobbing hysterically into her hands. She was entirely broken, stripped of her fake wealth, her stolen status, and the family she had used as a weapon to terrorize others. Trayvon did not look down at her. He simply turned his back on the golden child of the Caldwell family, buttoned his jacket, and walked toward the exit. He walked with the steady, measured stride of a man who had finally claimed his absolute freedom. I stood on the stage, watching him disappear through the heavy mahogany doors into the Atlanta night. The federal agents were wrapping up their sweep, securing the digital evidence I had provided them in the velvet boxes. The elite guests were whispering furiously, already rewriting their social circles to entirely erase the Caldwell name from their history. The storm had passed, and the fake empire was officially reduced to rubble. I stood near the edge of the stage, observing the absolute wreckage of the Astor Ballroom. The air, which just an hour ago smelled of expensive perfume and imported orchids, now carried the sharp metallic scent of panic and sweat. Federal agents moved with practiced efficiency, confiscating laptops, securing the velvet boxes I had distributed, and taking statements from the horrified investors. 2 female agents were forcibly escorting Vivian toward the main exit. She was completely unhinged. Her expensive emerald gown dragged heavily across the polished marble, the torn hem snagging on the legs of overturned chairs. She fought against the steel handcuffs cutting into her wrists, twisting her body wildly. Her perfect salon-styled hair had fallen into a tangled, disheveled mess across her face. As they pulled her past the elevated stage, Vivian locked eyes with me. The sheer, predatory hatred I usually saw in her gaze had been entirely replaced by raw, primal desperation. She dug her designer heels into the carpet, throwing her entire body weight backward to stall the agents. "Wait!" Vivian screamed, her voice cracking, echoing shrilly over the chatter of the federal investigators. "Wait just a minute, Nia, please." The agents yanked her arms, commanding her to keep moving, but I held up my hand. I gave a subtle nod to Agent Reynolds, who was standing a few feet away, documenting evidence. He signaled the 2 female officers to pause. They held Vivian firmly in place, allowing her to stand at the base of the stage stairs directly beneath me. I looked down at the great matriarch of Atlanta society. She was trembling violently, her chest heaving as she struggled to catch her breath. The thick, waterproof mascara she wore had run down her cheeks in dark, jagged streaks. She looked pathetic. She looked completely powerless. "Nia, you have to stop this," Vivian begged, her voice dropping into a frantic, pleading whisper. She was actually crying now, genuine tears of absolute terror. "Tell them you made a mistake. Tell them the bank flagged the wrong accounts. You have the connections. You know these federal agents. You can call this off right now." I tilted my head, studying her desperate, tear-stained face. The audacity was truly breathtaking. She was standing in handcuffs, facing decades in federal prison for a mountain of financial crimes, yet she still believed she could manipulate me into saving her. "Why would I do that, Vivian?" I asked, my tone completely flat, devoid of any sympathy or anger. "Because we are family," she sobbed, pulling against the agent's grip. "We took you in. We gave you a home. We treated you like our own daughter. Please, Nia. We are blood now. You cannot send your own family to prison. We belong together." The word family sounded absolutely repulsive coming from her mouth. I thought about the heavy leather-bound legal playbook Trevin had given me. I thought about the meticulous step-by-step strategy they had drafted to drug me, institutionalize me, and steal my unborn child. I thought about the poison she had slipped into my soup just 24 hours earlier, sitting at her elegant dining table with a polite smile on her face. I stepped closer to the edge of the stage. I looked down at her, making sure my eyes locked directly onto hers. I wanted her to see the absolute freezing void where her manipulation had once found a foothold. You told me I did not know how to handle wealth because I do not come from a legacy. I said, my voice projecting clearly, cutting through the remaining ambient noise in the ballroom. Every guest who had not yet fled the room stopped to listen. Vivian stared up at me, her chest heaving, waiting for a lifeline that was never going to come. You are right, I continued, enunciating every single syllable with lethal precision. I do not inherit empires. I audit them. And yours is bankrupt. The words hit her like a physical strike. Her mouth dropped open, but no sound came out. The absolute finality of my statement shattered the last remaining delusion she held. She finally realized that her southern charm, her fake wealth, and her manipulative guilt trips were completely useless. She had absolutely nothing left to barter with. I gave a brief dismissing nod to the federal agents. Take her away, I commanded smoothly. No, Vivian shrieked, her voice tearing violently through the ballroom as the agents yanked her forward. Nia, you cannot do this. You are nothing without us. You are a worthless, pathetic orphan. Her screams faded into a hysterical, guttural wail as they dragged her through the heavy mahogany doors and out into the hotel lobby. I watched the doors swing shut behind her, cutting off her desperate cries. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and profoundly peaceful. I turned my attention to the remaining crowd. The wealthy socialites, the corrupt politicians, the enablers who had turned a blind eye to the Caldwell's crimes for years, simply because they threw good parties. They were all staring at me with a mixture of absolute fear and deep, unmistakable respect. I had just dismantled their most prominent members in under 30 minutes without breaking a single sweat. I did not offer them a closing speech. I did not justify my actions. Predators do not apologize to the scavengers. I reached down and picked up my designer clutch from the head table. I smoothed the pristine white silk of my dress. My makeup was still flawless. My posture was perfectly straight. I walked down the short flight of carpeted stairs, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished marble floor. I walked directly through the center aisle of the Astor Ballroom. The elite guests parted instantly, stepping back to clear a wide path for me. They lowered their eyes, refusing to meet my gaze. I did not rush. I did not run. I moved with the steady, measured grace of a queen walking through her newly conquered territory. I passed the overturned chairs. I stepped around the discarded crystal champagne flutes. I walked right past Jada's abandoned counterfeit Birkin bag lying sadly on the floor near the bar. Every step I took was a physical detachment from the toxic nightmare I had just surgically excised from my life. I pushed open the heavy brass doors of the ballroom and stepped out into the grand lobby of the St. Regis. The transition from the chaotic ballroom to the serene, quiet elegance of the lobby struck me. The hotel management had clearly tried to contain the spectacle. A few bewildered tourists stood near the concierge desk, pointing toward the flashing red and blue lights illuminating the glass facade of the building. I walked past them, my white silk dress brushing softly against my legs. I felt no urge to explain the situation to anyone. The burden of maintaining a public image had always belonged to the Caldwells. I only cared about the truth. I stepped through the revolving glass doors and was immediately hit by the cool, crisp evening air of Atlanta. The humidity had broken, leaving behind a sharp, clear night. The cacophony of the federal raid was deafening outside. Radios squawked with dispatch codes. Heavy boots slammed against the pavement. The relentless wail of approaching police sirens layered over the scene like a harsh, unforgiving symphony. I stood on the edge of the grand circular driveway, watching the systematic dismantling of a corrupt dynasty. Vivian was still fighting the agents trying to secure her in the back of a heavily armored SUV. She kicked her legs, her designer heels flying off into the bushes. She was screaming my name, cursing me, blaming me for her own greed. I watched her struggle with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing an experiment conclude exactly as hypothesized. A young federal agent walked past me carrying a clear plastic evidence bag containing Julian's expensive counterfeit watch and his confiscated cell phone. The tools of his deception now nothing more than exhibits in a federal fraud trial. I closed my eyes for a brief second, letting the reality of my victory wash over me. The anxiety that had gripped my chest since I received Trayvon's warning text at the dinner table finally dissolved completely. The fear of being institutionalized, the terror of having my future stolen, the exhaustion of playing the naive fiance, it all vanished into the cool night wind. My car arrived, the engine purring smoothly. The valet held the door open for me, his eyes darting nervously toward the arrested Caldwells. I thanked him, tipped him generously, and slid behind the wheel. I adjusted the rearview mirror, but I deliberately angled it away from the scene behind me. I had seen enough of their faces to last a lifetime. I pulled away from the curb, leaving the St. Regis and the ruined Caldwell family in my wake. The sirens wailed loudly behind me, growing fainter and fainter as I drove toward the city skyline. I did not cry. I did not run. I simply drove forward into the night, the absolute architect of my own survival, ready to return to an empire that was secure, profitable, and entirely my own. The federal wheels of justice usually grind slowly, but when you hand investigators a perfectly packaged, heavily encrypted map of undeniable financial crimes, they tend to accelerate the process dramatically. The fallout from that rehearsal dinner was swift, merciless, and absolutely beautiful to watch unfold over the next 8 months. Julian's trial was a spectacular media circus that dominated the Atlanta news cycle for weeks. His high-priced defense attorneys abandoned him the exact moment his fraudulent retainer checks bounced. Left with an overworked public defender, he stood in a federal courtroom looking like a deflated, terrifyingly ordinary scam artist. Dozens of his victims took the stand, detailing how he had ruthlessly drained their life savings. The judge did not buy his pathetic apologies or his manufactured tears. He was sentenced to 15 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. He went from sipping vintage champagne in exclusive Buckhead P rooms to trading commissary snacks in a tiny concrete cell, completely stripped of the lavish lifestyle he tried to steal from me to maintain. Vivian and Desmond Caldwell faced a social and financial execution that was far worse to them than any prison sentence could ever be. The bank seized their sprawling estate within weeks of the federal raid. The prestigious country clubs revoked their memberships immediately and banned them permanently from the premises. Desmond's fake charity was completely dismantled by the state, and he was slapped with a massive restitution order that drained whatever hidden funds they had left. Today, the former king and queen of Atlanta high society live in a cramped 2-bedroom low-income apartment complex near the airport. The walls are paper thin, and their luxury vehicles were replaced by bus passes. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that Vivian still tries to wear her faded designer gowns to the local grocery store, clinging desperately to a ghost of a legacy that no longer exists. Whenever she walks down the street, her former elite friends cross to the other side, refusing to even make eye contact with the woman who nearly brought down their own social standings. Jada's descent was perhaps the most poetic justice of all. Trayvon's legal team, funded entirely by the cash envelope I provided in the parking garage, completely obliterated her in family court. The judge took one look at her massive credit card fraud, her stolen identities, and the audio recording of her casually plotting my demise, and immediately granted Trayvon full, irrevocable custody of their son. Left with nothing but a mountain of counterfeit luxury debt and heavily garnished wages, Jada was forced to enter the real workforce for the very first time in her pampered life. The arrogant girl who used to mock my working-class background now wears a stiff polyester uniform, ringing up customers at a fast food drive-thru window for minimum wage, handing out receipts to strangers instead of making them. As for me, I upgraded my empire. I purchased a sprawling multi-level penthouse right in the beating heart of Midtown Atlanta. The floor-to-ceiling glass windows offer a panoramic, unobstructed view of the city I conquered. I stood on my expansive private balcony tonight, letting the warm southern breeze wrap around me, holding a crystal glass of a bold, exceptionally rare red wine. I took a slow sip, savoring the taste of absolute freedom and hard-earned peace. My phone buzzed gently against the glass patio table. I did not tense up. I did not fear a fraudulent bank alert or a toxic message from a fake relative. I opened the screen to see a photo from Trevon. It showed him and his little boy standing in the front yard of a beautiful, modest new home down in Savannah. They were both smiling brightly, covered in dirt from planting a new vegetable garden. Trevon looked healthy, rested, and finally at peace. The caption underneath simply read, "Thank you for the fresh start. We are finally free." I smiled, tapping a quick heart response. I leaned against the balcony railing, looking out over the glittering Atlanta skyline. They thought because I grew up in the foster care system, I would be desperate, weak, and willing to accept any scrap of affection they threw my way. They thought my lack of parents meant I lacked protection. They did not understand that when you have to fight for your own survival since childhood, you build a fortress that no fake legacy can ever penetrate. Blood and legacy do not make a family. Respect and loyalty do. When toxic people show you who they are, do not argue with them. Do not try to fix them, and certainly do not let them gaslight you into doubting your own reality. Just stay calm, gather the receipts, and let the absolute truth do the talking. The best revenge is not stooping to their level. It is elevating yourself so high that their toxic reach can never pull you back down. Have you ever had to smile politely through a dinner with people you knew were actively trying to destroy you? Have you ever had to sit across from a predator and pretend you did not know their secret? Drop your story in the comments below. I read every single one of them. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more stories of surviving toxic people, and remember one crucial rule for your own peace of mind. Always lock your phone with a passcode and never eat the mushroom bisque.